When your territory is being colonized, there's a lot of force working against you.
Willie has always had an incredible sense of politics.
Willie was brave enough to say, hey, wait a minute, how about us Native people? We lived here for thousands of years.
He found power where power wasn't.
I'm not sure if it was so much a fearlessness as a willingness to be afraid.
He made himself a champion for his people and for Alaska.
Whether as president of AFN, president of NANA, the state legislator, commissioner of commerce, Willie knows how to get things done.
He knew how to demand attention, and they listened to him.
Indigenous people all over the country have been moved from their homelands. But in Alaska, we're still in our same places. So people are quite connected. It's fantastic, really.
My name's Priscilla Nongakak Hensley. Nongakak is my father's adopted mother's name. When I was growing up, people would send us traditional foods, muktuk or kwak or frozen fish or tutu caribou. I actually don't know the last time that I was in Iġġiaġruk with my dad. It's possible that it was when we lived there.
I've never really had it confirmed.
He's got something to say about every corner, about every building.
Well, this house here, I used to visit that with my mom when I was a kid. This house actually belonged to Abraham Lincoln and his wife Blanche. And Blanche's Inupiaq name was Kapuk. And she delivered me because back in those days, that's how people were born. She was actually the inspiration for the senior center. This is back in the early days of statehood. I mean, I was in the legislature, and there's no place for elderly people who need to be cared for. Alaska Natives were precluded from being in the pioneers' homes in a statute. I worked hard and I got the money, and so we turned it into our thing.
It's always interesting. You realize that he's like seeing the town and experiencing it and peeling back all these layers. And I can tell that there are people and places and observations that are layered into who he is and how he conceives of the world and our places in it.
My hometown, Iġġiaġruk, you know, little island. The value of this place, from my perspective, is that it's got a nice breeze, and it's right here where the salmon come, right? And there's seals out there, and there's belugas out there, and you get a little further, there's walrus out there, and also there's fewer mosquitoes. Right across there's Sisolik. Sisoak is a beluga, so a place where there are belugas. It's a very good place to camp. And beyond that is a place called Iġġiaġruk. Ani means to go out. Imik is water. Iġġiaġruk is the ocean. Kavea is sand. Anuri is the wind. Tsikinik is the sun. Nuvia is the clouds. This Iġġiaġruk here, we call Iġġiaġruk, it's your meat and fish rack. When I was a kid, every house had one because this is where all the action took place. Brought all your fish here, cut them up, dry them. Brought your belugas, your seals, cut them up, dry them, cook them. Had your dogs kind of tied up there maybe. So it was always a great experience just to walk up and down the beach because there was always so much happening.
Kotzebue, November 28, 1950. Abraham, Blanche, and Susie will sing the songs from the wolf dance.
This is really ancient country. I mean, people have been here for literally 10,000 years. This is where my life was formed. And of course, it's a completely different world now than back then. And you're talking about change in every which way. You're talking about religious changes, linguistic changes, legal changes, economic changes, sociological changes. You know, that's a lot to deal with. I'm a strong believer in identity. You got to know who you are. You got to have a set of values to bolster yourself, no matter what happens in life. I think this is a wonderful, beautiful place to have been born. I've had relatives from upriver who've taken me to right where they were born. There's nothing there, it's just grass and ground and water, but that's where they came into the world. You may be anywhere in the globe, but you know, this is home.
My dad's done a lot of things just with one human life.
I have a dream.
I'm probably the only one left in Alaska who was at the Martin Luther King speech. We marched from Capitol to the reflection pool.
That all men are created equal.
So I was not a stranger to the nature of power when the battle began over our lands. The statehood law had the seeds of a catastrophic loss of land for Native people all over Alaska.
Repeatedly, the United States government has promised to settle the land claims of the Alaskan Native.
They were all poised to start building the pipeline.
We had a firm legal claim to all of Alaska.
Now it is time to pay up.
I have just signed the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act.
I get tired of hearing the other side say, we gave the Alaska Native 44 million acres and $1 billion. They didn't give us
In January of '66, after I graduated from George Washington University, I decided to come back to Alaska for graduate work. That was a very key decision, or I may have never done research on who owned Alaska. That was just a few years after statehood. Congress said the state would take from us over 100 million acres of land without compensation to the Native people. That turned me into an activist.
And I recall the first trip that our former President Noddy and I took to Washington, uninvited. We had heard about a meeting. Of course, they couldn't throw us out. This was our land that they were talking about.
One of the things that my dad did was help to clear a space for people to be at the table. This was all Native land, and people, when they come here, they should always know that. And Native people should always have a seat at the table. And not just a seat at the table, but as many seats as you can get at the table. It's about being part of the power, it's about being part of the money, it's about being part of the expectations of this place. Dad was helping to ensure that we're here We're not only still here, but we're like really, really right here.
Of course, there's tons of other people who put their shoulder to the wheel to try to make changes.
These were young people who were in the trenches making sure that the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act was passed, securing our land right. That word that always comes in my mind is Iġġiaġruk. It's together as one. And it's the work that has to be done to bring people together to find common ground for a common future.
Our people, wherever they might have been, Southeast, Aleutians, interior, everywhere, they had this instinctive sense that we literally were on the verge of losing complete control of our traditional homelands after, 10,000 plus years.
And he talks about the way that the land, even just in Kotzebue, was sort of pulled out from underneath them. The white people around there realized that they had a choice between making it a general town site or a native town site. They chose to make it a general town site, and that meant that they could buy land. They could buy it, and then they just all bought it. And then it was all divvied up.
With none of the white man's paperwork to prove his ownership, an Eskimo's claim to his land is in jeopardy. In Kotzebue, whites have filed for title to all of the choice sites.
One of the strengths that Willie and those early leaders had is the recognition that the land is inseparable from our culture and our way of life, from our identity as Indigenous people. And the issues that are facing us cannot be siloed. We have to continually work on them.
I don't think my dad knew what the outcome of things that he was going to do was going to be, necessarily. It's like a lot of creative practices, in a way, where you don't quite know exactly how it's going to turn out, but you kind of leap into it with a goal, a direction, perhaps an idea, and then go where it takes you. My dad helped to communicate the importance of an Iñupiaq identity, of a human identity, that we remain connected to the land itself.
Yeah, bring the mosquito dope. There's 1 million mosquitoes over here. 2 million. This is Iġġiaġruk, named for that creek over there, full of whitefish. And Iġġiaġruk means it's shallow. And it's very shallow, as you can tell. And when we got flooded out over there in that one-side house when I was a little guy, in the dead of night, we moved to this high ground here and put up our tent right there. But this is where I was raised in part, in this, what now is something that you can't even see. It's turning back to nature. Yep, here's what's left of the old sod house that I used to live in as a boy with our family. And that area that's turned into water is where we dug a lot of the sod from. And didn't cost us anything to build. We just used some timbers, local timbers, and dug the earth out. Oh my gosh, there's more to it left than I thought there was. I would sleep right about here, and our door was right about there, and our tank stove was right about here, and our cupboards, our blazo boxes were right about there. Not a table, not a chair, not a bed, but this was home. And it kept us warm in the coldest of days. In fact, it was warmer than this tar paper shack we had in Kotzebue.
It was pretty meaningful to have a chance to go out to Iġġiaġruk, to see the sod house that he had helped to build as a child.
I was named for my grandpa, my mother's dad. His Iñupiaq name was Iġġiaġruk. in our language. Iġġiaġruk is a mountain. Iġġiaġruk is like a big hill. Iġġiaġruk, yeah. So we keep family names alive that way. Hensley, of course, has nothing to do with our culture. When the missionaries showed up in Kotzebue in 1897, they were there to change us, so they started naming families after themselves. They named us after famous Americans like Abraham Lincoln. That's a little history. My family found it easier to live outside of Kotzebue, about 10 or 12 miles along a little creek there called Iġġiaġruk. Really, we were living pretty much the way our ancestors had lived for thousands of years in terms of the resources. In those days, we didn't have regular income to buy coal or heating oil, so we pretty much burned wood. We were right there among the game and the fish. We weren't into the modern world, and we did not know about mortgages. We did not know about retirement, nothing. That was a different world. But it was a great life if you had your health. I didn't get to school that often because we lived out in the country. Our educational system was a colonial effort to sort of rewire our brains to essentially abandon our culture. So a lot of the younger generation was being weaned away from the language, including our family members. The younger family members spoke a broken English. The elders spoke Iñupiaq. That's how come I understand Iñupiaq quite well still. I never saw myself as a top student, but I guess I graduated from the 8th grade, and that was a big deal. And I actually made a little speech. My speech was, you can do it if you want to. Can you imagine that? That's my 8th grade speech. I think I still have it somewhere. If you wanted to go to high school, the government decided where you were going to go, if you went at all. For some who went off to federal government boarding schools, it was a pretty rough life. I was spared that, unlike my brothers and other friends. I ended up in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee for 4 years. That was my choice. I almost lost my nerve, actually, because I had absolutely no idea where I was heading. Couldn't even imagine it. And I was going to be away from family. Being away from family is like being in a purgatory in Iñupiaq world. But, you know, I guess I had enough curiosity to just take the plunge, you know, and go.
First time David and I saw him, we were down here at the boys' dorm, and we saw this guy walking down the hill carrying a shopping bag.
He was walking right down that hill carrying this bag, and he had all of his belongings in there. And that hair was sticking out to here, and I didn't know where he came from. I thought he might have come from another planet or something.
I was kind of like an immigrant in a sense, right? It was a decent place to learn about America.
Well, of course, we lived together in the dorm, and we spent, you know, hours and hours and hours and hours a day. So we became real good buddies.
I got to be real good friends with him through sports. We played football and basketball. I taught him everything he knows.
What you don't understand is it probably took you about an hour and a half to figure out how the shoulder pads and the helmet went on.
I was the captain, he was the co-captain. He was the fastest guy on the team.
He could jump higher than anybody.
Yeah, and he could kick a football farther.
Of course, I had never seen a basketball. I had never seen a football. I had never done track, but I learned to do all of those, right? I played 3 years of football. I played left half. In those days, if you're a young Iñupiaq that age, if you survived TB and chicken pox and influenza and everything else that everybody caught, you were pretty damn tough.
He just fit in like he'd been here forever.
We'd go to the mountains sometimes, there'd be snow up there where there wouldn't be any here, and he just loved that. He said, I love this place because it reminds me so much of home.
I was homesick, I was lonesome, but in our dialect, we don't pivot, right? We don't quit.
He loved his roots. He would have food shipped in here, some whale and stuff, and they'd have, you got to try this. I said, I'm not trying that stuff. I said, you give it to somebody else. I don't want to try dried whale meat, you know.
If I tried to think of something bad to tell you about him, I couldn't think of anything. And that's hard to say about anybody, really. He studied more than any human being I think I've ever been around. As soon as football practice was over, he'd be studying.
Or reading something.
And then 9 o'clock when they turn the lights out and everybody has to go to bed, and you don't have any lights in your room, he'd go to the bathroom and sit in there and study for 2 or 3 hours. And you'd walk in the restroom about any time of night and he'd be sitting there. He just was ambitious.
I had no source of income from home, of course. So I worked for 50 cents an hour cleaning tobacco patches. I cleaned the second floor. I had the dormitory. Then I had the washing machine and dryer concession where I washed clothes for 25 cents a load. All I had to do was buy the soap.
Well, he could do whatever what he set his mind to do, he would do it. It didn't matter if it's football, grades, anything. He'd amount to something.
Yeah, he could have been a politician.
Yeah. He should have been a politician. Oh, he would.
Everything that happened was sort of happenstance.
And it was like getting on the crest of a great wave.
This is an onion skin copy of a letter I wrote April 18, 1966. My very, very first public act challenging a public figure.
You cannot place the responsibility for the present chaotic state of affairs in Alaska lands on the natives. There's been ample...
It actually resulted in a meeting between a U.S. senator and this nobody, you know, living in a dormitory. But it wasn't just trying to get the settlement and get the land. I learned that I could actually function in a commercial world. I was able to put deals together. How's that? I was a politician. I was a lobbyist. I became an author. Now I'm a professor. Thank you, America.
My Eskimo name is Kalayok. I'm from Kotzebue, Alaska. Our people totally lived off the land. Willie was part of the last group of people that lived completely out in the country. The guys that live out in the country, they end up with so many other skills, you know, survival skills. You have to use a dog team to get anywhere. You had to go out and get the ice for the water. You had to go out and find the timber for heating your house. Willie was very lucky to have learned that way of life. That was absolutely Eskimo way. Willie served in all capacities, including as a representative for our people here.
When I took office in January of '67, I was 25. So I was literally a baby in political terms.
And he had the gift of talking with people, working with people. He had a body of knowledge that very few natives had at that time.
Our world, our land, everything else was about to be taken from us. We weren't getting the benefits of statehood, but there were rules being made over hunting and fishing that we had no control of. We had nothing to say about education. We were shipping our kids hither and yon everywhere for high school. We had no health care of any consequence and nothing to say about it. We had no power in the villages for our homes. We didn't have safe water sources. We didn't have communications with the outside world.
You're listening to KOTZ in Kotzebue on the 720 AM dial.
We couldn't afford to have private radio because there's no money out there for ads, so I worked on the idea of public radio.
You still have that coastal flood warning.
We came up with the Alaska Education Broadcasting Commission, and the idea was to have our own local choice and local control of the agenda and all that sort of thing.
It's time for tonight's Nipak story with Fear of Bears.
And that's how we got rural Alaska into the modern world. We worked on every front possible to try to make life easier and better and safer, warmer, lighter. I quickly got involved in electrification. Of course, back then we used Coleman lamps, kerosene lamps, candles, seal oil. There were accidents. We lost some friends to a fire. I found myself president of Alaska Village Electric Board. We pushed very hard to get the REA, the Rural Electrification Administration, to loan $5 million to get about 50-some villages electrified. I wasn't excited about trying to bring in new costs, but I felt that there was no way that we could actually modernize our villages to get things that people needed. So that's why I pushed hard. Of course, in time I learned that there's give and take, right? I mean, you might fight like hell on this, but you might agree on this, right? And so, you tried not to make it personal. It was very hard, and I had some real difficult fights politically that nobody remembers. And of course, overshadowing all of those conflicts was this whole question of who owned Alaska.
One of the Eskimo leaders is State Representative Willie Hensley of Kotzebue. What makes the Eskimo believe that the federal government or the state is going to take that land they claim?
You know, and I know, what the history of the United States has been when it comes to the American Indian. All the way across the West. When the Indian wouldn't give, then that's when you had the battles. And you herded them on the reservations. Except for this particular day and age, we don't have the covered wagons. We've got the pipeline. After these hundreds of years, of battling with the Indian and taking his land and giving him a piddling amount of money, that we think that it's time that the Congress and the American people will please give us a fair deal on our land.
Oil was discovered in 1968 in Prudhoe Bay, and ARCO and others really wanted to get the oil, build a pipeline, get to a nice free port, get it out, and then native land claims were impeding all of that. It was the perfect storm.
We were fighting a humongous battle, really kind of like the last of the great Indian Wars, so to speak. Urban Alaska saw us as the enemy, as the ones that were preventing the development of Prudhoe Bay, that stopped the development of the pipeline. And of course, they were looking for a future here, right? And oil was it. And we were the bad guys because we hung it up for quite some time there.
There was this cadre of just incredible people, Jake Adams and Oliver Levitt, John Borbridge, and other Native leaders around the state just wanting to get something done.
What I did was write a letter to our villages, encapsulating everything I had learned.
I remember the clickety-clack of the typewriter.
People took that and they stuck it on the post office or native store door, and people looked at it and they responded.
My parents had a business. They had an air taxi, and it was run out of the home. My dad built this little cubby hole of an office for my mom that was under the staircase. It was barely enough room for one person to be in there, but when Willie needed a typewriter, he would share this with my mom.
I scrounged enough money to get a few people from the villages together. I had this kind of a cheap little map of Alaska. So I just took a big black pen and I just drew a big line into all this region that drains into this sound right here. The Nortak, the Kobuk, the Selwyn. And at the end, I basically said, well, what do you want to do? They said, claim it.
There is this kind of force about him, and he's very resolute, very determined and focused. He was one of the first ones that I observed kind of pushing boundaries.
And by gosh, we stopped state selections and any other transfer of lands for a period of time in this region.
He found power where power wasn't. His thought process is one of inclusion.
And everyone had different situations. Some were more comfortable with the Western world. Others were quite traditional.
I used to think about it as a come-along method. You know, he wants people to come along. Sometimes it takes a little longer to accomplish it, but he had the patience to do it.
People stepped forward to volunteer, to do whatever they could to help get a settlement.
One of the reasons that Willie finds himself in the lead is because he always brings somebody along with him to make sure that the ground was ready to be taken when you got there.
You have to have national support to pass a law of this magnitude. We had to keep ourselves united, literally crawl all over Capitol Hill, getting our message out to every congressman and every senator. We couldn't get everything we wanted. That's just the nature of things. If you're a minority petitioner, when the door's shut, you're outside and they're inside, right? But in the end, we made a deal, right? I mean, it was a deal with lots of flaws, but it gave us some of our homeland, and it gave us capital to build on.
He was always looking for a solution. That's what Willie was good at. He traveled the villages, and when everybody was ready, guess who ended up in point? Even now, Willie's presence is always felt within the region because he kept his roots there.
Okay, wait a minute, let me take a video. Here we are, ground zero.
That was a tasty one. Anyway, well, this is where we hung out. Now, there's not many people left until you a site like this. Our people were tough. They had to be. Lots of hunger, lots of cold, literally no support from the outside world. It's like go out there and make a life. And we did. Through thousands of years, we evolved to make a livelihood in a very, very tough part of the world. We worked together. We shared what we got. What I had to share because what I learned in high school and college, it was an obligation. I put this knowledge into action.
Well, I'm Guyana. Guyana is northeast of Kotzebue, up on the Kobuk River. We really got to know Willie and coming around the village for what we should do about our lands. Willie is a cool person. He don't get excited.
I often think about Willie's journey as his story in reconnection. Our people were very migratory. Our people would follow resources. Willie saw an opportunity to get an education. So he went out and he gathered that education and he came back and used it to secure our land. That connection culturally, reconnecting with the land, being around elders, having that guidance, it's a cornerstone of self-determination, absolutely.
The Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, TAPS, if you will, is run by Alaska Pipeline Service Company. We connect all the oil fields on the North Slope to the Port of Valdez. It's an 800-mile, 48-inch pipeline that feeds the Alaska economy. The lands that TAPS crosses, they're traditional Alaska Native lands, and you could not have built that pipeline unless you settled the Alaska Indigenous lands claims.
The difficult part in our life those days, we didn't have tools to work with. But Willie has always been determined to make a change in our lives. I don't think we would have the land we have right now if it wasn't for him.
What Willie did, in my view at least, is he made himself a champion on that issue for his people and for Alaska. He was always an advocate and a strong one. He was never an adversary. He's done a lot for pretty much anybody who lives in this state, whether they realize it or not. If you're getting a dividend check, you owe it to that settlement, that legislation.
I'm in Anchorage to attend the Alaska Federation of Natives Convention.
Coming from a small village, getting an education.
It's a big event where all the Alaska Native regions come together to talk about issues impacting our communities, anything from climate change, land issues, fish issues.
This is the First Alaskans Institute, which I chair, 39th Elders and Youth Conference. It's actually one of the highlights of the AFN week.
Alaska Native corporations are very unique. Indigenous land that our people retained under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act is owned by our corporations. And so we have a responsibility to manage that land with our shareholders' interests in mind, which includes our culture and our subsistence way of life first and foremost, and then potential economic development.
We're in front of the headquarters of Nana Regional Corporation. We started out first as a nonprofit called the Northwest Alaska Native Association. After the act passed that Nixon signed in 1971, we incorporated as Nana Regional Corporation, which is now, by Alaskan standards, a pretty substantial entity that employs about 5,000 Alaskans and another 15,000 or so around the globe, right? And this is the headquarters. So we're very proud of what our people have been able to do.
Willie's absolutely persistent. He has to have been to be where he is today and to have accomplished the things that he did. When he got involved with the Nana Development Corporation, John Schaefer was running Nana. Robert Newland was part of this little triumvirate. They were a strong partnership. Really did big things.
Willie and my brother John were right in the midst of organizing the regional corporations and learning how to manage big business. They had to really get creative trying to figure out what is the best way for them to make money and also help our own people socially.
They figured it out and did so in a way that that helped to expand on unity within the region.
We were destined to fail, but we didn't fail.
I think the reward was seeing people better off than they'd been before and helping people to know that there could be a better day.
To me, we preceded most corporations in the world in trying to find more meaning than just the bottom line. There was no joy in working for just an economic entity, right? There had to be more meaning to it. Iñupiaq means the real people. We came up with a mechanism to instill our values into an empty shell, which in my mind is what a corporation is. It's a construct. And that became known as Iñupiaq Ilikwasit, the best of our people that had evolved over thousands of years. It was like the Ten Commandments, in a sense. It was our Ten Commandments. It was what our people believed the supreme qualities that people should have.
Willie's strength is his ability to help people who are not Iñupiaq or not from our region to connect with what is important to us and what it is that we're trying to achieve.
He had to educate a lot of people about Alaska, and then he had to educate people like me about the connections to the land.
Look around to see if there was any game, caribou.
He's a great storyteller, not just his stories, but stories of Alaskan people and the issue at hand. Willie understood the power of that voice coming from the real people who lived it.
And our closest neighbors were Iġġiaġruk, Pete Nelson.
Willie feels a sense of obligation, not just to himself, as many people do these days, I think, and not just to his family, but I think to humankind, to help people have a good life.
Our values are just human values that can be adopted by anyone. It just so happened that they are Iñupiaq in origin and in practice.
And I hope that we could cut it and apply about our region, with how we need to bring up.
Who knows what the future holds, right? Because we're a changing society, right? I mean, not too many years ago, we had the vast majority of our region living here, but now half of them live elsewhere. Whether the corporation, the native corporation, survives is directly connected to identity and spirit. So those values become even more important as a connection to your homeland.
As they say, no country for old men.
I need to bring some of that sarigig home. These are kind of small, but better than nothing. Good medicine. When I burnt my arm when I was a kid, this is all we had, wrap my arm around. This is Iġġiaġruk. It's just called a big weed, but it's really got medicinal properties. They built that sod house up there, and we lived there for I forget how many winters. I was 7, 8 years old. I was big enough to help. I was the wood chopper, and so one day, while they were building the house, I found this plank somebody had found on the beach, right? And I thought, oh, somebody found some kindling. So I chopped the bugger up, not knowing that was supposed to be our door. We had no door that winter.
We remain connected to one another and to the community and to the land itself. It's not like he lived in the Dark Ages, but still, it's a remarkable transition from that to his obsessive video taking with his phone.
This is our homeland. This is fundamentally where it all began. This is what it's all about. It's trying to elevate our people and their opportunities in life. Not just in the region, but wherever they are scattered across Alaska and the globe. This homeland we fought so hard for forever. The key was, for many of us, the values that we inherited that allowed us to function without getting lost in all that morass of institutions and politics and change. To me, that's really the challenge for our leadership today and in the future, to not lose track of what we were trying to do. We didn't want to become giant business types. That was not the goal. The goal was to hang on to the land and hang on to our identity and our spirit as Iñupiaq. That's the ultimate goal. To maintain our culture, our language, our music, our art, our knowledge of the land, our sense of belonging that has united us throughout history.